Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Felix. I have a decade of experience in virtual production. I founded Happy Mushroom, now called Narwhal Studios, and I am going to break down Fathead, hopefully in a way where we can have good questions for me at the end, which is where I excel. So prepare those questions. We're going to start by playing a video, and then we're going to jump into a deck, and I'll open Q&A. So if we could please play the video. So we did a lot of the in-camera VFX parts of this. This is 10 seconds, so they compress this tremendously. So if we just play it. So we did a lot of the work that was going to help dictate what's going to be where. This is a breakdown of some of the sets, right? That's the final version, which actually turned into these shots. And so we're going to go through that. So the making of Fathead, lessons from the virtual art department workflow. Like I said, my name is Felix. I am the founder of Happy Mushroom, what used to be formerly Happy Mushroom and is now Narwhal Studios. We joined a company called Arctic 7, which is a game development company and has 100+ game artists, and now are helping them also adopt this process so we could scale up the kind of projects that we do. And we just teamed up with Orbital to also offer an in-camera VFX process. So as we walk through this, I really just want to talk about what we did, break it down, and then hopefully get questions from there. Thank you. So here's a little Fathead overview. And so part of what I want to point out here is how multiple different sets run in tandem, right? And so it says here that Fathead was a game-changing project that aimed to create photorealistic live-action world with a limited timeline and resources. All the worlds we created for Fathead, there were 3 worlds in total, and it actually took multiple minutes of the film, or it's featured in multiple minutes of the film. And so when we started, we only really had 4 weeks, so we were very happy to hear that the creative team was open to allowing us art direct and guide the process. So if you see here, one of the things that a lot of individuals ask us is, how do you get multiple sets running at once? And so we wanted to show a little bit of how we break these down. We break these sets between 2 major stages. There's the design stage, where you're really, first of all, deciding on the shoot method that you want to use. You have in-camera VFX that could be different versions of it. You could have an in-camera VFX shoot that is not a final shot out of the stage. You could have an in-camera VFX shoot that is just to use the lighting information. You could have another shoot where you're using every other frame, you're doing a green screen or a final picture, so that you can later on fix it in post, right? So ultimately, in the design stage, we're figuring out all of those different parameters that we want to include, and we're working with the filmmakers so that they are aware of it. Now, when we move into the build stage, it's really about making it look pretty and optimizing it. And I think a lot of people ask us, how is it that you get things to not change later? And it is by providing the key creatives with the information that they need to know around what are the differences between these 2 stages, right? Now, after the build stage, we have a turnover. Now, this turnover is a step that we have included, which is the stage where we pass things over to either the LED screen stage, or to the VFX team, or to whoever is the next person. And that turnover document includes a blueprint, includes reference from the filmmakers, includes everything that someone else would need after that first step so that they can actually build what's going to be built. The construction team, for example, uses this a lot, the physical construction team. So that turnover document is something we're going to show later. Now, how did we do it? Here are the key milestones to the project, from kickoffs to reviews to turnovers, emphasizing the importance of planning and communicating throughout the process. Now, before this slide, we were showing how things run in tandem, but how is it that we manage the project, right? Because all of a sudden, one of the things that I'm finding is that there's a lot of mismanagement of the human beings, of the people, of the key creatives, because you're doing so much at once, and we're burning out our creatives. When I'm going to these projects, I'm often seeing too much happening at once. So what we try to do is we break out the stages. You have the set design and the construction, which is the design and the build stage happening. You also have the visualization team working with you at the same time. And the reason they go to halfway is because they're part of the design stage, and then the construction of all those worlds and of the assets happens for the rest of the time. So that's the first thing. You have visualization and you have the VAD running in tandem, right? From there, and if you see down here, during the design stage, we are working on something that looks pretty good, but during the construction stage, you take it to that next level. The beautiful part is that there's a moment in between here where you can budget everything out. So before this process existed, Previs was using assets that were just stand-ins. And so you couldn't really budget out those worlds exactly as they would because you didn't have the input from the production designer, the set decorators, the DPs, right? So all of a sudden, when you have those people involved, there's a step between this design stage and the construction stage where you can budget out every element. All of a sudden, it has the visualization, which is the brain of the director, the set design, which is the brain of the production designer, and if you have a cinematographer, the DP, you are narrowing down your scope. Instead of making everything, the DP is going to tell you, no, this is the area I love. I want it to be dark over here. I want it to be out of focus over here. Those are the kind of decisions that get you to having 40% cost savings. Those are the decisions, right? So this stage, right in between here, in my opinion, is the most critical stage to saving money. And that's why I wanted to point it out. So a creative review, these are different reviews that we have with those filmmakers. During the creative reviews, you might have a review with the director and all of his filmmakers together looking at the world, right? And so you could also have an independent review with the production designer reviewing the props. The filmmakers have different goals with these reviews. The DP is also thinking about the tone, the lighting, so that's creative reviews. And those creative reviews, each project is unique because each filmmaker likes to work differently. So those are meetings that I take a lot of time asking questions around how do you want to work? How can I facilitate you? Putting your information inside of Unreal. How would you like to do it? Maybe those filmmakers want to use an Xbox controller. Like on Jungle Book, Jon Favreau would use an Xbox controller and would fly through a lot of those sets because that was a way that he liked to work. Versus I have production designers that want to jump into a VR headset. And they are thinking about things differently, right? Because the production designer needs to understand scale. Then you have the set decorator, which, let's be honest, after VFX, they were just working on a tiny little space because of green screen. But all of a sudden, those set decorators are coming in and they're set decorating the Unreal Engine world as well. So you have very high level talent working with you in those creative reviews. And when those turnovers happen, you want that information to go all the way to the end. Now, the next one you see is a pre-light. And we sprinkle in the pre-lights because there is the story, there is the creation of the worlds, but then the pre-light is a dedicated meeting with the cinematographer or the director of photography where that role gets to light the world, put some cameras down, and figure out what part of that world they actually want to take to final. That's an essential step to this process that the DP or the cinematographer, I recommend, should be a part of. And if you don't have that role and the decision power to have that, then you are going to build way more than you need. A cinematographer, they're often making decisions around lighting. Hey, make it darker. That's a cheaper set. Hey, this is a 50 millimeter lens. It's out of focus. That's a cheaper set. Hey, I actually don't want to look at this area with hundreds of props like a junkyard. I want to look at this wall and a tiny little bit of the junkyard. These decisions are what make these things actually come in on budget. So anyways, we go through review, pre-lights, right? We have this cadence. Every week we're having these meetings, right? Every week we're having either 1 or 2 creative reviews and 1 or 2 pre-lights. And then at the end, again, the client approval and the vendor turnover. So you're turning over all that information to the construction team, the physical construction team, which is trying to figure out what's going to be virtual and what's going to be physical. You're turning it over to the gaffers. What's the lighting scenarios that the DP decided on? You're turning it over to the VFX team. Hey, this is what we want it to look like. A lot of them are not going to need to be taken further because they've been decided on beforehand. So the turnover process is a very pivotal part of everything we do. Next one, please. So preventing changes later, planning and the VAD. How does the virtual art department play a vital role in minimizing changes later in the project? You can see, understand, and evaluate what needs to be done. So I really want to hone in on this, how do things stop changing later, right? And so there's something I've noticed during my years of doing virtual production. When ideas are in people's minds, they're grandiose. They're bigger than life, right? And so visualization was born to provide the director with an ability to go from grandiose to manageable. That was visualization. I worked in visualization for 8.5 years, 9 years at the 3rd floor, and so what I noticed was that we would make these gigantic previous projects and people would tell me, oh no, but your worlds are throwaway. You know, we're not gonna use that, we're gonna redo it later. And that was because the production designer, who is actually in charge of the worlds, and the cinematographer weren't there. That's what the VAD gives you. Now, with this process, all of a sudden, if you have a VAD that is aware of their role, which is empowering the DP and the production designer so that things don't change later, if they're aware of that, you have a process that between the VAD and the visualization, you have all the information that you need to budget something almost to the exact number that you need. And that is how we prevent things from changing later. So that turnover document, we actually have the director sign it, the production designer sign off, the DP literally sign off on it, because they're agreeing to the fact that, hey, we have creative control, this is what we want, and so we want this to move forward towards the end, help me get there, right? So that's a lot of the turnover process and how we control those budgets and how we are able to prevent things from changing later. Thank you. Now let's talk about the turnover process, since I keep talking about it, and the review meetings. How have these processes evolved and accelerated decision making? Now each key creative has their own view and their own control, providing us with much more information. I was the VAD supervisor on Jungle Book with the team that also created The Mandalorian. And so on Jungle Book, as the VAD supervisor, there's a role that I've actually done throughout most of my career called the hot seat. And in the hot seat, you're hired to sit and to take commands from the team. And so on Jungle Book, we were using Unity, and I had a screen like this, a gigantic screen, and I would sit on a computer, and in Unity, we created the worlds, and all the filmmakers would go, hey, go over here and show Jon Favreau the shot that I made, or change the lighting scenario, or move that rock so we could see a little further, and I was doing all the work. One camera, one view, basically one source of information. So like sometimes I'm showing what the DP wanted to show, or sometimes I'm showing what the production designer wanted to show. That form of work is how everything used to be, and most people are working this way still. And I want to invite us to a new way of working, which is the way we do it on The Mandalorian and how we did it with Marvel and a lot of these studios. Now with real time, what we do is we send these filmmakers a machine, And each one of them, so when I used to do it on Jungle Book, there's only one view. And if we were remote, you're only screen sharing one screen. Now, with everyone having their own real-time world and them being able to move the screens, I'm showing a view from the DP. I'm showing a view from the director. I'm showing a view from the production designer, and I'm showing a fourth view from the VFX supervisor. And they themselves, and then there's the view from the art director, right? They themselves move around, find areas. The director's talking about story. The DP's over here looking at his version. The production designer's over here moving the mountain. And all four of those views are streaming live. So I'm not the one moving the camera anymore. That's 4 to 5 times the amount of information the community has to look at. That is almost invaluable. I see that as the biggest sale, as the biggest value. So all of a sudden, these review meetings are epic because I'm not controlling the camera. I'm a facilitator. If the production designer's over there and they're saying to move the mountain, I can move the mountain and not worry about the view, because the production designer could set the view themselves and go, hey, everyone, look at my view. And we've built tools to make those meetings very smooth, right? Ultimately, all of a sudden, you're working with the highest paid team, right? So you want to make an ecosystem where they can give 5 times the amount of notes live and still capture them and be able to execute on them. So that's the biggest difference that we find. And so up here, you can see that this is part of the turnover document when we pass it over. Once you're done with all those review meetings, because, hey, review meeting, what comes out of it? What comes out of it is that the construction team takes that and they build a real blueprint of what's going to be built in real life. So this is a blueprint that got built, right? And so that corner right there, that's the physical construction set. Without VAD or without visualization, you might be inclined to try to fill in that whole set. But because we had the information from the DP, the production designer, the VFX supervisor, et cetera, they figured out that they could get all of their shots for this section in that corner. That's the value, right? And so at the bottom left, you can see that we are showing a different project. This is Rob, the VFX supervisor from Titanic. This is Andrew Jones, the production designer from The Mandalorian, and they're working together. If you can see here, Andrew Jones has a VR headset. He's the production designer. He wants to know scale. He wants to understand that when he builds this physically, it's going to feel like what he imagined in his head. So it makes sense for that role to wear a VR headset. Rob is on a screen, literally on a computer screen, but he's also flying around and has his own view. The conversation's completely different. They talk about almost the same exact things they're talking during a traditional shoot because they can play. And then here to the left, we have, if you see this grid, this is Andrew Jones, the production designer, figuring out where does he want to put the LED so that he can cut what's virtual versus what's physical. That's what he's doing right here. Measuring out what's going to be virtual versus physical in a visual way that everyone, the 50 people that have joined the session, can understand. And he talks through it. He's like, hey, you know what? Move the screen back. I think I can hide the seam with some tile here. You know, I think I could. And that's the biggest difference that I see between review meetings that we're doing now versus before. The amount of information that comes out of it is astronomical, and it is a harder meeting to manage because you do have everyone being able to critique, et cetera. And that's why it is so important to find people that are specialists at this, specialists at managing human beings, at being under pressure and being able to be in the new form of the hot seat, which is just slightly different. Thank you. So each creative in their own view drives engagement, right? Engagement drives faster decision making. We're now in an ecosystem where we need to make decisions in pre-production. That's new for a lot of these creatives. They're used to allowing things to move later. And so a lot of the decision making and the way that I drive decision making is by engaging them, by making sure that they feel like they have a level of control. All of a sudden, for those of you that play video games are very addictive because you control the character. We are giving them control of the character in the game engine. That's how we're driving engagement. By giving them control, the cinematographer, Baz Iodine, he was a DP on The Mandalorian as well. This is some of the shots that he's putting in himself in the scene, right? And so that's engagement. All of a sudden, he's not having to just sit there and wait till someone moves the camera, and they're not going to do as good of a job as he can do. He's a genius at cinematography, right? So the fact that all of a sudden we can have someone like Baz work on this himself, that red line right there is the LED screen stage line. So he is also aware of that while he's establishing his shots, the distance from the screen, the kind of shot he wants to get, etc., is how we drive engagement. We also have an example here of the production designer, right? And this is Todd Chanowski. He was the production designer on Obi-Wan. And so here, what I love about these meetings, and something that I find people are very surprised about when they hear the conversation, they're really just talking as if they were on the stage physically. He's going, oh, you know what? Hey, guys, it looks like this ladder's going to be on the physical set. Can we do something with this? Maybe I don't want to build this. How much, hey, producer, how much cheaper is it going to be if I don't have to build this ladder or these steps? Oh, yeah? Move that red forward. Cool, that's what I'm going to do. Right? So the conversation shifts from ideas to a concrete visual that they can publicly share to the entire department. Like, we've done some meetings that have close to 100 people while they're just talking for 4 hours straight. That value is some of the most intense meetings that I've been able to experience in all the best ways, right? So engagement drives faster decision making. If you don't have filmmakers that are loving it, that are into it, you need to find a way to get them into it, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to make or break it now, with the fact that things need to be decided on early. So, thank you. Next one. Not thank you. Next one. Achieving photorealistic quality. How do we make it look photoreal through skilled? So in this one, I really want to break down some of the techniques that we use, but most importantly, it's important to note that the LED screen, the VR, the iPad, these are just tools, right? Ultimately, it starts with and ends with the creative. And that's, what I mean by that is to not go over, it starts and ends with the creative. The budget, to win the awards, it starts and ends with the creative, right? And so what I want to point out here is a little bit of what I see when it comes to the creative. So through skilled talent in Unreal Engine and collaboration with the filmmaker for lighting that enhances the story, here's a list of insights of how we get to photoreal. Collaborating with production designers and set decorators ensures a seamless blend of virtual and physical elements, enhancing the overall production value by leveraging their expertise. I've done this for 15 years, right? And I've worked my entire career with production designers. I'm working with production designers that have 30 plus years above me. I want them to make the decision. I'm here to facilitate, right? And so by collaborating with these creatives, like we had the honor to work with Bill Pope on The Matrix. Of course, from The Matrix. Of course I want that creative to have the camera in his hand virtually and make the cameras himself. Not potentially someone else doing it and then there's an approval process over a TV and and it gets, so that's number one. It's really, how can we get those high-level creatives to do what they do best and inform the virtual and the physical, not just the physical or vice versa. The next one, we work with director of photography to identify and develop key lighting scenarios, ensuring their creative integrity and informing the teams later in the pipeline. So the DP is very important because, and this step of things is very important. With the director of photography, often you end up with like 50 versions of the world, right? Because they're going to experiment, and so what you want to do is work with them directly to bring it down to the few that you would create for the next stage. This is one way to reduce the amount of time that things take. Preparing 3D assets for the final lighting pass. After you work with the creatives, there's a step where you want to optimize. I see a lot of optimization happening at the beginning, when really the creatives, it's probably better if you know what you're going to build, how far you want to build it, and then you go and you work on the assets and you prepare them. And lastly, by planning the camera angles, we start upping the quality of selected assets and optimizing them for in-camera VFX. So this way we can create seamless and effective workflow. If you know your camera, you know how much work you have to do. If you don't know your camera, naturally you're going to have to build more than expected because you just don't know exactly what those creatives want. So that's what the last one's about. Thank you. Composing the perfect team. How did we compose the team and why? Here's how we composed the Fathead team. So we have our partners. For Fathead, we were working with the director, C-Craig, production designer, director of photography. And then so at Narwhal, formerly Happy Mushroom, we had a structure where we had a creative director or an art director. And so underneath them, there's a lead VAD artist. That lead VAD artist is working with a coordinator. Now, that creative director is the touch point for these guys above. And that creative director is one of the roles that's very difficult to find now because it's almost like they have a supervising art director background, but for VFX. They don't only are capable of helping build these worlds, but they should be capable of managing the workload, budgeting, etc. Similar to how a supervising art director does for a production designer under physical construction, right? So that's this role. Since it's not a role that's necessarily been fully adopted in the industry, but there's a bunch of names that people use. This could be a VAD art director. We've heard it called a managing VAD art director if they have multiple VAD art directors under them. We've called it a creative director in the past. We've also called it a VAD, VAD supervisor. So these are all names that this role can have, but really it's because the community at large is trying to find what the skill set is. And I'm here to share that it's similar to supervising art director, but almost with a VFX background. What they do is very similar. Management and collaboration. What does the project management look like? And what are some advice to help communicate with the departments? Of course, I think virtual production, a lot of people look at virtual production and they think that we're here to take their jobs. It's actually more of like, we're here to facilitate. We're here to bridge those different roles between departments. And that's what this is about. Speak to key creatives and enter agreements on communication preferences and important details. Each key creative has a different way of working. Asking them and coming to an agreement. Hey, how do you want me to update you? Hey, what is it that's important to you? Some people, all the key creatives work very differently because they have different backgrounds. A production designer with a background coming from location scouting is very different than a production designer with a background in concept art. They're going to want drastically different workflows. Daily meetings. Meet daily with those key creatives, even if 10, 15 minutes. Hey, production designer, what's up? DP, you want to light something today? Check out what I'm doing. Implement a management process that is both linear and flexible to certain kinds of decisions. We carry and we use the agile management workflow for tasks, right? So earlier we showed how there's several sets going in tandem, but it's important to note that management for games is agile and for tech, and that is what I find is the best management style for this process, because when you have someone like Bill Pope or Jon Favreau giving you notes in a meeting, you might have to change everything you're doing in 24 hours. And that's very similar to software development. If your phone breaks, you take it to Sprint, and they gotta reprioritize and get your phone fixed. That's why the agile management is what we find is the best process for a VAD. but it has to be coupled with a waterfall, which is the linear. Linear waterfall, agile is the more organic. So we approach it both ways. And lastly, onboard key creatives, providing tools and lessons to make them feel comfortable, happy, and understand the value. It goes back to engagement. If you haven't engaged key creatives and if you onboard them, what I see happen a lot is like, hey, we have a process, we're gonna use it on your project. And then the production designer comes in and he's like, I really don't wanna work this way. And so that's what that one's about. And we're getting to the end. Now, what were the lessons learned? Collaboration is key. Agreements, enter agreements, not expectations. And again, communication is essential. So like collaboration, agreements, and communication, right? We did talk about agreements a little bit, but agreements is what I like to use instead of expectations. I think we come from a culture of expectations, and when you change your frame of mind and you go, hey, I don't have expectations for you, I just want to come to an agreement around how we want to work. It's not about how we come in with a process, it's about how we come to an agreement. And that's the most important part around this slide, I believe. And that's it. Does anyone have any questions?
Hi there. Quick question for integrating these kind of workflows with the VR headset. Is that economical or feasible on a small scale? Because you said you're sending workstations and stuff like that. But if you're doing like commercials and you have different meetings each week, how do you integrate something like that into your workflow?
So depending on the scale, right, you can have a location scout setup in your space and bringing them to the space so that they could do it there. So we often have two versions of the review sessions. We have the one that's in the office, and it looks like 6 VR headsets around the table where people come in and they put it on and they meet up in the cloud. Let's say you're on the moon, everyone meets up on the moon. We also have another version where they do it from home comfortably in their living room or in their home office. That version is harder, a lot harder. However,
because they need to have knowledge of Unreal Engine to know how to move the camera around and all that.
That's a major component, right? But that part tends to be easier than the work it takes for the company to get the machine, mail it out, get it set up in their home. That whole process is very manual. Then you got to get the machine back. All that work along with the education. However, the value, every project we've done it on, it's been very eye-opening for anyone that uses it, right? Because it does allow you to have a remote workflow that feels like you're in the office.
Yes.
Okay.
How do you see Fathead? Where do you see it?
So that's actually, right now
Good
it's doing the
question.
festival circuit. So we're applying to festivals. So the creative is allowed to go out and bring it out. So it will eventually be out. You can find Ripple Effect on Dusk. So the prior film we did that has about 150-page white paper is on a YouTube channel called Dusk.
Thank you, everyone. I'll be around here if you want to ask questions. Grab me.
Thank you.